Hi, welcome to How to Answer the 3 Hardest Interview Questions. My name is Katie Reynolds. I'm on the marketing team here at LaSalle Network, and I'll be one of your hosts today. I'm so excited to introduce Tom Gimbel, who's the founder and CEO of LaSalle Network. LaSalle Network is a local recruiting firm headquartered in Chicago, and we staff for accounting and finance, administrative roles, call center, customer service, HR, marketing, and executive search. Tom is a nationally recognized expert on hiring strategies and company culture. He's worked with thousands of candidates, thousands of companies, so he knows what questions hiring managers are going to ask and what kind of answers they're looking for. Speaking of questions, we would love to hear some of yours. If you have any questions as we go, please submit them to GoToWebinar, or you can tweet at us using our hashtag #HardQuestions. A quick note on the format, I'll be asking Tom some of these hard interview questions as we go. He'll be answering as if he were a candidate, and then we're going to break them down and explain how you can best approach them. Quick look at our agenda before we start. We'll be covering a couple of the interviewing basics, interviews and nerves, how to really prepare yourself, and then we'll dig into the 3 interview questions that we think are most challenging, and we'll tackle some of your questions. With that, I'll turn it over to Tom.
Thanks, Katie. I'm glad to be with everyone today. And there's several parts that go into a successful career. The first one is actually getting into a place where you can succeed. How do you get the job? And that's what we're going to talk about today. But you've really got to rely on past experiences, the knowledge you have of the corporate and or nonprofit environment for which you're wish you are wanting to enter, and then knowing yourself and what you're capable of and how that matches up. And the preface I will give before we begin is most people think that they want every job they interview for before they go. And what you have to realize as a candidate going through a job search mode is to give answers that you think the interviewer wants to hear. If they're not truthful answers, can lead you to take a position or get offered a position you may not be right for. And the goal here is to be in an experience, or to have an experience, to be in a place where you can succeed. So I'm very excited to be able to talk about 3 of the tougher questions. I argued with Katie vehemently about saying the 3 hardest because it's always different upon everybody, but we live in a world of absolutes, and so hopefully this can work for the majority of you out there and give you some different thoughts before you go into a very important interview. So Katie, I'll let you take it from here.
Hi, so we wanted to say interviewing can be nerve-wracking. We understand, but we wanted to go over some of the basics, the higher level things, before we really dig into some of the questions. Going into an interview, it's important that you have good posture. You don't want to slouch in the chair. You want to make sure you're not fidgeting. You want to make sure you're always making eye contact, looking at the hiring manager, and always have a firm handshake. Tom, do you want to speak a little bit to the importance of honesty in interviews?
Well, first of all, I love the movie Step Brothers. I'm a big Will Ferrell guy, so I think you picked a really good movie for that. However, when we're talking about honesty, it's that people are going to go in and they say what I mentioned a few minutes ago, what they believe the interviewer wants to hear. And that's a great way to go about it if it's the truth. And when you fib on things, whether you're in sales and it's numbers, or marketing and projects, or accounting and deadlines, you've got to actually know it, because we'll get into this a little bit later on in the webinar. You don't want to fail knowing you. And when you get into lies, there's an old expression that says it's easier to remember the truth than it is to remember a lie. And a good interviewer, and the higher level you're talking to, the better interviewer they should actually be, is they're going to remember what you say, and they're going to circle back. And they may not even call you out on it at the time, but it may discourage them from moving you on in the process. So when you wonder why you haven't gotten an interview or moved on to the final stages, it could be because of a little white lie you told during an interview that somebody was perceptive enough to pick up on.
Thanks so much, Tom. Now we're going to launch our first poll. Question is, how do you prepare before an interview? And your options are: look at the company's website, look at the company's social media, researching who you're interviewing with, or do you think about your answers? Tom, do you have any examples, while we wait for them to fill out their polls, of candidates that you've met with who have really gone above and beyond while preparing for interviews, and it's clear that they really did their research?
Well, it's an interesting question, Katie, because there's really two sides to that. There's people that prepare for interviews and flaunt it, and there's people that prepare for interviews and don't. And the ones that flaunt the research they've done, depending on the type of role, they sometimes really push the envelope too far because nobody wants to feel like you know more about them, and people will go overly in-depth on topics that really don't pertain to the role that they're interviewing for. If you're at a lower or staff level and you're talking about mergers or acquisitions or divestitures of things or turnover rates or things like that, it may be something that the senior level manager or executive is saying, why are you really asking about these questions? Why aren't you talking more about the role that you're going to be doing? On the flip side, whether it's a marketing role and you've got someone who's created a presentation packet or a pitch to have for that, or somebody who's done something with accounting and they're very well versed on your industry, your billing cycle, how you do your accounting, accrual or cash, and they're going to talk about those types of things, it can add a lot of value.
All right, we're going to take a look at, it looks like everyone's filled out the poll, and we're going to take a look at some of these responses. Now, Tom, just looking at this, it looks like the majority of people are looking at the company's website when they're preparing for interviews. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what is something else that maybe people aren't doing that they should be before an interview to prepare.
Well, let's talk about the basics, Katie. The basics are they're looking at the company website, which is really important. If you don't know how the company promotes itself, then you're really not learning what they want you to know. The key thing for a candidate is it's what the company wants you to know. It's their own propaganda, and it's very important, and hopefully it's accurate and the company's truthful, but to go and do research beyond that is really important. But what you mentioned and what this slide says of researching yourself is really where you need to begin. You need to know about you, and you need to look through the chronological history of your career, and if you're right out of college or if you're 60 years old and you're going into the last position that you may have during your work life, that you want to take a look back and really think about and outline and write down what you did at each of your roles, what you accomplished, who you worked for, how long you worked there, and why you left those jobs and why you went to the next one. Now, I'm not a big fan of job hoppers, but it exists, and people leave companies for good reasons and bad reasons too soon. And you need to be able to justify those. But if you haven't written down, and I'm not talking about a resume, I'm talking about knowing yourself, where you were mentally at that time in 2020 hindsight. And if you're not ready to admit that you made a mistake somewhere along the lines in your career, you may not have the humility for the role you're interviewing for. And there's a very big difference. You may have been recruited by a company like mine for a specific position, in which case you weren't even actively looking. And you've got to be able to communicate that. But my favorite line is, you can't fail knowing you. If you can't intelligently discuss what you've done and who you are with assertiveness, with eye contact, with concise answers, you're missing the boat. And, we put the picture of Peyton Manning, and, for all you football fans putting this season aside, this is somebody who takes their job extremely seriously. There's been stories written ad nauseum about how he spends more time in the film room studying not only his competition coming up in the following Sunday, but also his own tendencies so he doesn't relay things to the defense. That's how you've got to be. You've got to look at your hard skills. If you're in marketing, are you a good writer? Have you done search engine optimization? And what were the results of that? If you are in accounting or finance, have you used Excel? Tell me about your Excel skills. What have you done? What type of projects? How much data have you analyzed? Yada, yada, yada. So you've got to know what your technical skills. If you're doing sales, how many calls do you make? How many meetings? How many presentations? What's your ratios of meetings to closes? To know those things. And quite frankly, that's where the majority of professionals are lacking. Not only in the jobs they want to get and how to explain it, but even where they're at. And if you knew this information better, you might be even excelling at a higher level at your current company and not looking for a job. We'll save that for a webinar in 2016. And then we get into the soft skills. Teamwork, organizational skills, communication are three of them. But what they are is, I call them tangibly intangible, right? We know when somebody has good teamwork skills and when they're communicating well, but you really can't outline what you want that to be. There can be people that have terrible communication skills, but they talk all the time, or they send emails all the time, but they're not an effective communicator. Their emails aren't outlined correctly. They're hard to understand. There aren't action items after them. From a teamwork perspective, all of us can reflect on a time either professional or even going back in college. For me, it was 25 years ago, but it's looking at group projects and what role I played and what role somebody else played and where I had to pick up the slack and where they had to pick up the slack. You've got to be real about this, and not just for the purpose of getting the job, but real about it to know how to improve to not make the same mistakes again. So knowing your skills is crucial. Then you have to know your accomplishments. Right? Big projects, success stories, challenges. Did you overcome them? And everybody's views of accomplishment are different. If you're in a support role, an accomplishment is very different than being a revenue producer. But if you are a sales or marketing leader and you're talking about administrative functions versus creative functions, you're missing the boat. If you are a staff level person and all you talk about are the things that are outside of your realm, I can't tell you how many resumes I've looked at where people have a resume that's listed with accomplishments outside of their job description. First and foremost, you need to know what your accomplishments were in the role in which you're in, and then get into the bigger picture of how you affected the overall company in ad hoc committees later on. And then you've got to be able to tell those stories in an effective way. And no one's, for the majority of folks that are interviewing, people aren't looking to have Tony Robbins sitting across from the desk from them. What hiring managers are looking for is somebody that knows what they accomplished, what the benefit was to their group, their division, their corporation, and delivering that in a positive way, and then why that result was positive. Did it either increase revenues? Did it save the company money? Those are the two things that matter most to any company. And then you have to know your personality. Who are you, what you need, and what you want. And everybody comes into my office and we interview internally, oh, I'm a hard worker and a team player and I want a collaborative environment. And that's great, but that's out of some interview book, webinar 101 on BS and things to say. And no one comes in and says they're lazy and no good and cause trouble and catty communicators, right? But you've got to know what you need. How much hands-on management do you need? Do you need a personal trainer, or can you get up and do P90X on your own every day? There's two distinctly different types of people that can go and put their DVD in and do P90X for 30 to 45 minutes a day and get in great shape, and somebody's got to pay $75 an hour to a personal trainer. Know who you are, know what you need, know what you want. Because if you go into an environment that has a different setup, you will fail. And if you're a job hopper, it's probably because you started out not being honest with yourself, and in the interview, you weren't honest with your potential employer.
Thanks, Tom. For our first tough interview question, Tom, how would you answer, tell me about yourself?
So there's really multitude of ways to do this. And what I'm going to tell you is my perspective based on 20 years in the business world, 17 of leading my own company that I started, and a few working for other folks. And at the end of the day, you've got to have some ability to read the person who's asking you a question. But when people ask you to tell them about yourself, you've got to start with and realize they want to know about what about you is going to contribute in a positive way to their corporation. And sometimes you need to acknowledge the obvious. Right? So if somebody says to me, Tom, tell me about yourself, my number one answer in an interview, my first thing I would say would be, well, I'm sure everyone tells you that they are hardworking and team players and thoughtful and deadline-oriented. Let me give you a little bit of a background and tell you, I'm the youngest of 3 kids. I grew up outside of Chicago. I worked my way through college. I started a landscaping business taking care of 75 yards. I interned in college while working a part-time job, and I didn't do as well in school as I probably should have. However, I was out having some fun as well as working at the same time, got out of college, had a couple sales jobs, and I spent a lot of time kind of figuring out the type of culture that was right for me. But when it gets down to about myself and who I am, I'm a competitive SOB that doesn't want to lose. But I'm sure everybody tells you that as well. The difference between them and me is if I have to be the first one in the office and the last one to leave, if I have to come in on Saturdays, and it's not me telling you this because I have references of Bob, Sally, and Mary who will tell you what I did to be the #1 sales guy at these other companies, right? I'm not just giving them cliche, do whatever it takes answers. Do whatever it takes is usually a lie from people. Because if doing what it takes to be the best means working 7 days a week, 10 hours a day, most people won't do it. And if there's somebody who's in your team that you're going to be joining who is that much better than you, for you to be the best, you may have to work 7 days a week. So say what you mean and explain who you truly, truly are.
So let's break it down for everyone that's listening. How would you recommend that they approach this question? Someone says, "Tell you about yourself," and their mind totally goes blank. How would you recommend they approach it?
Well, Katie, if their mind goes blank, they're not prepared. You're not ready. And I will tell you right now, and it's the old line, old school guy that I am. If your mind goes blank in the interview, you shouldn't get the job. You're not ready, you didn't practice. And the majority of people don't practice nearly enough. And it goes back to your resume of knowing who you are, what you need, and what you want, and not failing knowing you. So number one, how many times did you look at your resume to make sure there were no typos? How many people did you have look at your resume purely for typos, right? To make sure that that's right. That's the first thing of not failing you. And then you've got to practice it. So were you talking out loud to yourself in the mirror? Were you talking out loud to yourself in the shower, in the car, on the bus? Were you listening to podcasts about interviewing strategies? What were you doing to be prepared for that moment? And whether you're sitting across from somebody who's younger than you, older than you, a minority, a majority, a woman, a man, it doesn't make a difference. If you're not ready to go in and talk about you, you're missing the boat and you don't deserve the job. And if an interviewer asks you tough questions, whether they're traditional ones like this or crazy ones like we've all read about in what Google does, you need to know you. And if you can't answer some wildly crazy strategic out there question, that's fine. Maybe you shouldn't have that job. But you need to know you and why you're different. Now, the truth of the matter is a lot of people don't feel that different, right? And I'm not your therapist. But what I am going to tell you is you've got to find a level of differentiation, whether you're an administrative assistant, an accounting manager, a financial analyst, a network engineer, a help desk manager, a marketing director. It doesn't make a difference. You've got to look at the people you've worked side by side with and figure out what differentiates you. And if it's not your work ethic, what is it? Is it your ability to disseminate material? Is it your ability to break down the complex and make it simple? Is it your ability to deliver things in a clearly concise manner in written and verbal communication skills? But those are the issues you've got to realize in is who you are. And it's got to be concise and clear and efficient. So you get to this point where there's the sideline of technical skills and career-focused accomplishments and then personal life. So it's where you're from. As I mentioned, I grew up outside of Chicago, where I went to school, University of Colorado. Interests and hobbies, you got to be careful on that. A lot of people want to get off topic and talk about these other things they've done. I've got to tell you, what they can do is show somebody that you're more interested in something else beyond the job of helping them do their job, right? People want well-rounded people who have interests. And whether you're a sports fan or coach your kids or work at the local church or temple or what have you, or whether you're an Ironman competitor, it doesn't make a difference, right? But you want to leave that a little bit to the end to say, and I'm not sure if when you asked about who I am or tell you about myself, whether you want to know on the personal side as well. However, I have a great stamp collection and I have this, that, or the other thing that you want to share that. But again, remember, just because you're interested in it doesn't mean they are. So a brief overview, less than 15 or 20 seconds. I like to run marathons, and I play golf when I can, but I don't play that much because I work all the time, right? You've got to be wary of what people are going to think when you say that you have something that takes up a lot of time, because no one wants to hire somebody and commit to paying you when your first priority is running out to make sure you've got the latest and greatest Star Wars action figure before the newest movie comes out.
Thanks so much, Tom. For our second tough interview question, Tom, why are you looking for new opportunities?
So it's an interesting question, and it really determines on a couple facts. Number one, if you're unemployed, it's an easy answer, right? I'm not working right now. Now, the question of if you're unemployed, how you're going to go about doing these things is you've got to say why you were unemployed. Did you lose your job? Were you fired? Were you downsized? If you were downsized, why did somebody else who does the exact same job as you stay? Why weren't they downsized? How did they pick you? Right? And then if you were currently working and you're looking to leave, you got to have an answer for that, and you got to be truthful. And the expression is people join companies, they quit managers. And there's a taboo out there that people think they shouldn't talk badly about their current or past employer. And while no one wants somebody who's catty and bitter, if it were that great of a relationship, you wouldn't be leaving. So you've got to explain where the conflict was for you and what you're looking to avoid in the next job. Because what if what you describe you don't like at your existing company exists at the place you're interviewing at? You don't want that job. I can't tell you how many people make the same mistake over and over and over again. And then lastly is if a recruiter, such as somebody at our firm, sources you, they headhunt you, they call into the company, they find you, and they present you, and someone says, well, why are you looking for a job? And you say, I'm not looking. I was sourced by a recruiter, called me, sold me on an opportunity. They did a great job and got me to come in. I'm not sure I want to make a move yet. It's a very viable, honest answer.
Thanks, Tom. We're going to launch into our second poll question now. If you could answer, why are you looking for a job? With your options being increased compensation, growth opportunity, a better work-life balance, you dislike your current manager or leadership, or you don't like the company culture. We'll see as people come through. Tom, do you find that when you are talking to candidates, you see a lot of these answers as well?
Yeah, I think you see a cross-section of these. The majority of people are looking for opportunity, but we'll see what the survey says. I mean, money obviously plays a role, but it really depends at what point people are in their careers, what they're looking for, where their educational background is, and where they're coming out of.
Well, our poll is already done, and it looks like you're absolutely right. Far and away, people answered that they're looking for new opportunities because of growth.
I guess I should pay you more, Katie, because it's always good to look smart. So the opportunity for growth is something that's a double-edged sword, and people think they want it, but it really does tie into, can you go back to the results question, please?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or not? So what you have there is this growth opportunity, and when you get that, what's going to usually happen that people just don't think through the process is when you get more opportunity, your work-life balance suffers, because with more opportunity becomes more work, and with more work becomes less time to do your hobbies and your personal life and all those other things, and you tie that in that if you're getting more opportunity, you're giving something up in your personal life, you're getting increased compensation. So right now you've got increased compensation, better growth opportunity, you've given up a little work balance. Those two usually counterbalance the third. And then you've got you dislike your current management and leadership. Now, that's an interesting one, and it's one that does drive a lot of people away. But I'm not surprised that it's outside of growth opportunity because they're really tied together. If you're not getting the opportunity that you think you need, believe, or want, it's usually because your manager and leadership isn't giving it to you.
So Tom, let's go one by one. And how would you help someone answer if their reason is they're leaving because of compensation? How would you recommend they answer when a hiring manager asks that?
I'd say first most, if you're leaving before 3 years and you want more money, you've got something big to answer for. And so I would tell you that if you're leaving for money in less than 3 years, why did you take the job to begin with? And if you're going to follow up and say, no, I really don't like my manager or I don't have the opportunity, then it's not about the money. And so I think money is one of the worst reasons to leave. However, if you're recruited for a position and somebody told you about it and the number is 30, 40, 50% more than what you're making, I'd answer it truthfully. I love where I'm at. I've got a great job. However, you only go around this world once, and the price point that this position pays is a lot bigger than where I'm at. And I love where I'm at, but at the end of the day, I've got kids and bills and this and that, and I want to make sure that I'm setting my family up, and it wouldn't be smart of me, I wouldn't be successful if I didn't explore that opportunity.
How would you recommend they answer if they want to leave because of work-life balance?
Well, I think it's a very tricky conversation. I think it's a fine reason to leave, and I think people need to do where they follow their heart. But you need to realize that if you're interviewing for a company that's a high-growth company and people are going a million miles an hour to accomplish crazy tasks and crazy goals and big, audacious opportunities, and you say that you're looking for work-life balance, you may not progress in the interview process. But to say that you were working 80 hours a week and you want more of a work-life balance, it's very viable. And the question you have to answer before you even go on the interview is 60 hours work-life balance, is 50 hours work-life balance, or is it 40? And you've got to be truthful about what you really want. Because if you want 40 and you take 50 and then you leave in another year, you're building a bad career track for yourself, a bad resume. So you got to be very careful about that.
Speaking of career tracks, and I know that we've already touched on this a little, but to briefly go over again, if they're leaving because of growth.
Well, you're leaving because of lack of growth is really what they're doing, Katie. And you've got to show that this is what I've done. And this goes back to knowing you. I accomplished A, B, and C. I did it in this amount of time frame, and I feel that I'm ready to go on to the next step. That's a very viable option, a very viable thought pattern for people. And so you want to make sure that you have the examples to show why you think you deserve to be in a bigger role than what you're currently in, what you accomplished, to say, well, Mary got the promotion and I didn't. Mary got the special project and I didn't. Well, tell me what Mary's done and tell me what you've done. You've got to know those issues, and you've got to have very tangible reasons for it.
And finally, how should candidates answer if they're leaving because of a bad manager or just their manager in general?
No, they're usually not leaving for a good manager because they're a good manager. So you've got to be very truthful, and you've got to make sure you've thought through this and role-played this with somebody else. Because if you're leaving for a manager, if you say, well, they're unfair to me, and they gave work to somebody else, a good interviewer is going to ask you, tell me about the other person. Tell me about the results of the project. Did that person succeed in the project? If somebody comes to me and says, they were always giving them to this person because that person's a brown nose or they're friends with them, my number one response is always, did the person execute the assignment or the project? If the answer is yes, and they did it well, then it wasn't a bad decision to give it to them. And everybody's got something riding on every decision in a company. Somebody's boss is looking at something. Some client is looking at something. And so it's absolutely fine to say, I'm on my 5th manager in 2 years. It's a turnover machine. Very valid reason to want to leave. There's not stability in the organization from a managerial level. Makes sense. But to say that you were treated unfairly without documented reasons of how the business suffered as a result of the unfair treatment, right? You got to remember that. You may think you're being treated unfairly because you didn't get certain projects or promotions, but if the business grew and the work was successfully done by the other person who got it, was it really unfair, or was that person just really good? And you've got to be ready for the answers to that.
Thanks, Tom. For our third tough question, Tom, how would you answer, where do you see yourself in 10 years?
Well, when you're my age and you're 43, you just hope you're above dirt. But, you know, to everybody else, I think when you're looking at this thing and you say, where do you see yourself in 10 years, sometimes it can look like a dark tunnel, and you don't know. You don't know where you're going. You don't know why. You know, I need this job. I got bills to pay. I got a mortgage. I got a kid going to college. I want to move out of my parents' house. Depends who you are and where you are in life. But when somebody asks you where you see yourself in 10 years, a lot of people's natural reaction is to lie. And they don't think it's a lie, but they say something to the effect of, well, I'd like to move into management if you're in your early or mid-20s, or I'd like to move up and take on additional responsibility in different states and oversee different regions and go do it. You know, that's what you say now. I firmly believe that the best answer you can give to where you say you see yourself in 10 years is to say, do you mean with your company? And the answer is, yeah, if you were here, where do you see yourself in 10 years? And I would say, I think that conversation is probably a little bit longer based on what I accomplish in the first 9, in the first 8, in the first 3, in the first 1, and what I can do to progress. From what I understand from studying the company, it looks like there's a lot of horizontal movement as well. So I may think I want to go vertically up the chain of command here, but it looks like there may be some opportunities horizontally along in different departments as well. What I hope to do is to demonstrate that based on my work ethic and my intelligence and my knowledge, that I can accomplish and successfully deliver on results that you ask me to do. And with that, you'll reward me with different opportunities. So my answer 10 years is, I hope to be at the same company I'm working at tomorrow, assuming you offer me the job. And if that's the case, I hope to progress financially and have that tie in responsibility-wise, but to tell you in what area, I think I'd be lying to you.
Thanks, Tom. We actually have a bonus question for all of you. We found that a lot of candidates struggle with knowing what questions they should be asking hiring managers. So when the hiring manager asks this, they freeze. Tom, what are some of your favorite questions that you've heard from candidates?
No, I think what I like a candidate to ask is questions that pertain to the job they're interviewing for, not insurance and compensation and vacation and things like that. I want people to ask about questions that'll help them make intelligent decisions on whether they want this job. Why did the last person you hired succeed or fail in this role? What characteristics do they have? Do you feel that those characteristics are important for anyone going into this role? If I'm interviewing for a job, which thankfully I haven't had to do in a while, but I want to know, tell me about the worst person of someone on your team. Right? I want to know what you view as acceptable failure. Let me repeat that. Acceptable failure, meaning it's acceptable because they're still employed. They're failing because you can identify them as the worst person on your team. Now I know where this thing matches between what success is and what failure is. And I think that's really important. What makes the best person on the team better than number 2? So if you stack rank your employees, and if they're not ranking the employees, how do I know where I fit? How do you get raises? How do you get promoted? Everybody's different, right? Maybe some of you want to go work in a socialistic corporation where everybody's at the exact same pay grade and bandwidth, and you can't get promoted. That's not my style. That's not where high growth companies are looking for. You want to know, even if everybody's making the same level, what do I need to do to grow out of that band? Why does the last person leave the role? Were they promoted? Were they terminated? Did they quit? Where'd they go? Why'd they leave? What makes you different than your competitors? Now, I put a double twist. I put, are you competitive internally in the corporation? Right? But I also want to hear, do they know who their competitors are and how do they differentiate it internally? Can you share an employee's progression? Tell me about Mary. I want to know where she developed from, how she grew, and why. You have to realize everybody's track record isn't going to be the same, and sometimes the timing is really the crucial part of it, that they worked there at a time when promotions were aplenty and it's a different economy now. And at the end, you got to be careful that it's over, but when someone says, is there any other questions I can ask, was there anything I said that gave you hesitancy about moving me forward through the process? Now, you got to be careful on that because it could be just a personality conflict. You may have had a good dialogue, but they just might not think you're a good fit for the company. So you don't want to push too hard, but it's a good way to leave with a sense of knowing where you fit.
Thanks so much, Tom. Now we're going to field some of the questions that you've submitted throughout the webinar. Tom, one of our audience members wants to know, how do they explain when they've only had one position so far straight out of college? So they have limited experience. How do they answer some of these questions?
Well, I think when you've had limited experience, you've more got to talk about what you've done in the limited experience that you have. And so you've had one job, or you're right out of college. The issue is saying, this is what I know. I know that if I'm given something, I will run 100 miles an hour. And I want to hit deadlines, and I want to grow, and work is my #1 priority. And I think you've got to reiterate that in the knowledge of saying, hopefully there's an opportunity for me to figure out how to do things on my own as well as get training. People imagine if you hired someone to babysit your kids, right? You got a 13 or 14 or 15-year-old kid to come in and babysit your kids. And they came to you and they said, tell me about the training program. How do I know how to do this? You want somebody who's sitting there and saying, I understand what's going on. Now you might ask, where's the food and what time do they go to bed, but not the basics of what's going on. And that's what you want when you hire somebody who has the initiative to get the basics of the job done.
Thanks so much, Tom. Another attendee wants to know how to answer some of these questions when they were fired.
Well, I think the answer is, why were you fired? And what did you learn from that? And to look somebody in the eye and to say, they terminated my employment, they fired me. And the reason was, I had a really big ego after accomplishing some really big goals, and I pushed the envelope. And I've learned my lesson, and I have humility. I missed deadlines on this, and I realized it's a valuable lesson. And people always say you learn more from your failures than from your successes, and I got fired for this. I'm never going to let that happen again. Everybody makes mistakes. The key is, do you own it, do you realize it, and do you have a sense of humility?
Thank you. Another attendee wants to know, or says, some workers enjoy the culture of short-term contract work. How do they talk about that contract work during an interview?
You say it just like that. I did contract work because I couldn't get to any full-time offers or interviews. I went through a staffing and recruiting firm, or I knew of somebody that needed somebody for a period of months, and it paid well. It paid weekly. I needed cash. It was a challenging opportunity, and I succeeded. Remember, they had your resume and they brought you in for an interview. They've already looked past that. The question is, why do you want to go? If you like it so much, why do you not want to do that anymore? Right? So if you're lying about it and it was a short-term gap to make money, then say that. If you really enjoy it, then why are you now looking for a full-time job? And if it's for another short-term position, then it's a perfect thing to say, just like this, it was the right place at the right time.
Thanks. I think we're going to take only one more question. Tom, another attendee, wants to know, how do they talk about wanting to leave a job or talking about compensation when they think they were really underpaid at the last role?
Well, it's an interesting thing. So you know where your salary's at, and if money doesn't come up in the conversation, you're not going to deal with it until the offer. And the majority of companies ask you how much you're making, and you need to tell them that. And you should be able to find out what the salary range is. But if you were vastly underpaid, for people to say, why are you leaving, for you to go, hey, I did my research online, I have a lot of friends in the industry, I'm active in the association for my industry, and I know that I was 35% under market, that's a valid reason to say you're leaving. But you can't talk out of both sides of your mouth and say, I love the people, my manager's great, they treat me fairly, I'm just being 35% underpaid. I got to tell you, if you're 35% underpaid, they're not the greatest people in the world. And you got to be truthful and honest with yourself and with them.
Thanks so much, Tom. We hope that you've had some great takeaways from this. If you want more interview advice, please visit our website, and you can download our interview prep guide. I'll make sure to include that in our follow-up email, and we'll also be sending out the recording and the PowerPoint slides after this. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you have a great day.